What if some of the most important history in the world was never written down? Not in textbooks, not in government records, not in official archives, just remembered. In a voice, in a story, in someone saying, "Let me tell you what happened." That's where oral history begins. In this video, I'm going to explain what oral history is, how it's different from a regular interview, why it matters so much, and why preserving people's stories may be one of the most important things we can do for future generations. Because when a person is gone, their records may remain, but their voice, their humor, their emotion, their perspective, that can disappear unless someone takes the time to preserve it. If you're new here, this channel is all about preserving stories, family history, memory, and the voices that help us understand the past in a more human way. So let's start with the big question. What is oral history? Oral history is the recording and preservation of someone's firsthand memories, experiences, and reflections. At its core, oral history is a conversation, but it is a very intentional kind of conversation. It is usually recorded, often audio or video, and it focuses on a person's lived experience. That's what makes it so valuable. And oral history is not just facts. It is not just dates. It is not just what happened. It is also how something felt, how a person understood it at the time, what they remember now, what mattered to them, what they want others to know. Right? So when someone describes growing up during wartime, immigrating to a new country, working in a factory, raising a family, serving in the military, teaching in a local school, or helping build a community, that can become an oral history when it is intentionally recorded and preserved. The key is simple. Oral history captures history through human memory and personal testimony. And that matters because history is not only made of events, it is also made of experience. Now, one of the biggest misconceptions is that oral history is just another word for an interview. Not exactly. Yes, oral history usually involves an interview format. One person asking questions and another person answering them. But oral history has a different purpose. A regular interview might be designed to entertain, promote something, gather quick opinions, or get short answers for a news story. Oral history is different because it is meant to preserve lived experience in depth. It is slower, it is more relative or reflective, it is more or less about hot takes and more about memory, meaning, and context. In oral history, we are not just asking, what happened? We are also asking, what was it like? What did you notice? What do you remember most clearly? How did that experience shape your life? What would people today misunderstand about that moment? That difference matters, because oral history is not trying to squeeze a person into a soundbite. No, it is trying to make space for their story. And frankly, that is something our modern world, could use a little more of. We have plenty of clips. We are running low on listening. So why does oral history matter? It matters because official history is never the whole story. Documents are important. Letters are important. Photographs are important. Government records are important. But none of those, by themselves, can fully tell us what it felt like to live through something. No. A census can tell you where a family lived. A military record can tell you when someone served. A newspaper can tell you what was reported. But oral history can tell you what your grandfather was afraid of, how your grandmother kept the family together, what a neighborhood felt like before it changed, how a person made difficult decisions, what everyday life looked like, behind the headlines, right? That is where oral history becomes powerful. It gives us access to the texture of life. And just as important, oral history helps preserve voices that are often missing from traditional historical records. Not everyone wrote memoirs. Not everyone was quoted in newspapers. Not everyone left behind neat boxes of labeled documents. But almost everyone has a story. That means oral history can help preserve the experiences of ordinary people, workers, parents, veterans, immigrants, students, church members, business owners, neighborhoods, and community elders. People whose lives mattered deeply, even if history books only gave them a footnote, or no note at all. Oral history also matters because memory is perishable. That is the hard truth. Stories fade. Details blur. Voices are lost. Every year, families say some version of the same sentence. I wish I had asked more while I still had the chance. Oral history is one way to answer that regret before it arrives. A good oral history is not just a list of questions and answers. It is built on a few important things. First, curiosity. Good oral history asks open, thoughtful questions. Not just, did you like school? But, what do you remember most about walking into that school for the first time? Second, listening. This is big. Oral history is not about rushing to the next question. It is about noticing what matters and the answer. Sometimes the most important moment in an interview comes when someone pauses and then says something they have never said out loud before. Third, context. A good oral history helps connect personal memory to the wider world. So if someone talks about, growing up during the Great Depression, or maybe serving during Vietnam, or moving during the Civil Rights era, or starting a business during a local economic boom, the story becomes even richer when we understand the historical setting around it. Fourth, preservation. A story is valuable, but if it is never saved properly, labeled clearly, or passed on in a usable format, it can still be lost. Recording matters. Archiving matters. Transcription matters. Stewardship matters. And finally, a good oral history is grounded in respect. These are not just content clips. These are people's lives. That means oral history should be approached with care, patience, and dignity. Let's make this practical. What does oral history actually look like in real life? It can look like a granddaughter sitting down with her grandmother and recording her memories from childhood about marriage, work, motherhood, and the changes she witnessed over 8 decades. It can look like a veteran sharing what military service was really like, not just the dates and places, but the friendships, the fear, the routine, and the silence afterward. It can look like a community project preserving the memories of a long time ago of residents before a neighborhood changes forever. It can look like students interviewing local elders to better understand a town's history. It can look like a family recording a parent's life story, so children and grandchildren will one day hear not just what happened, but how that person laughed, reflected, and made sense of life. And that last part matters more than people often realize. Because one day, a descendant may not just want to know that someone lived. They may want to know who they were. It is also helpful to say what oral history is not. Oral history is not gossip. It is not a random chat with no purpose. It is not just collecting trivia. And it is not perfect memory treated as infallible fact. That last point is important. Memory can be incomplete. People forget details. They confuse timelines. They interpret events through emotion and hindsight. But that does not make oral history useless. It makes it human. Oral history is valuable not because memory is flawless, but because memory reveals meaning. It shows us how people understood their lives. What stayed with them, what they carried, what they choose to remember. So oral history does not replace documents and records. It works alongside them. The best history often comes when personal testimony and documentary evidence are considered together. And maybe this matters today more than ever. We live in a time when people are constantly recording little fragments of life, quick clips, short posts, scattered photos, fast reactions. But oral history asks for something different. It asks for depth, for reflection, for attention, for memory with meaning. It reminds us that preserving the past is not only about famous people or major events. It is also about mothers and fathers, grandparents and neighbors, teachers and tradesmen, migrants and ministers, business owners and bridge builders. People who may never appear in a museum exhibit, but whose lives shaped families, communities, and local history in lasting ways. That is the part of the beauty of oral history. It restores scale. It tells us that a human life does not have to be world famous to be historically significant. So if you want the simplest possible answer, here it is. Oral history is the recorded preservation of a person's firsthand memories and lived experiences shared in their own voice so that others can learn from them in the future. That is oral history, not just information, inheritance. And if there is someone in your life whose story matters, a parent, a grandparent, mentor, veteran, friend, or community elder, do not assume there will always be more time. Ask the questions, record the voice, save the stories. Because someday what feels ordinary now may become priceless. If this video helped you better understand what oral history is, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments, whose story do you wish had been recorded? Or whose story are you determined to preserve now? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.